This is Kaycee Machino. I'm the Family Advocacy and Community Training. My partner, Karen Cooper, our training specialist, will be fielding questions in the Facebook chat. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the training. And as long as we have time available, we will attempt to answer questions for you at the end of the presentation. In this presentation, we will review the guidance from a federal level and how that guidance was passed down to the states. This guidance requires changes to the IEP document so that IEP teams could be prepared for future school closures and how special education and related services would be delivered and an alternate method of instruction be required. In March 2020, COVID-19 swept across the country at an alarming rate. It was and still is a global pandemic. Our nation was unprepared for how to deal with the rapid spread of contamination. Medical providers did not know enough about the virus, and districts across the country were fearful of the safety of their students and staff. Some districts were on spring break and extended their break for several weeks. Many districts decided not to return to the buildings while offering virtual instruction or worksheet packets, while some decided to close for the remainder of the school year. How does this impact our students with disabilities requiring specialized instruction, related services, and accommodations or modifications in order to receive a free appropriate public education, or FAPE? It is required that if an education is being provided to the general population of students, that special education must also be provided to students with disabilities. Many districts, prior to waiting for any guidance from a federal or state level, closed their doors for the remainder of the school year. Many didn't have the resources to provide virtual learning to their students. Many also had the misconception that it would be better not to provide an education to any student because they did not feel they could meet the strict requirements for a FAPE to special education students. On March 16th, 2020, the Office of Civil Rights program of the U.S. Department of Education issued guidance to state and local education agencies in response to issues of discrimination. And many districts lack a response to providing continued education to students. The guidance addressed many prongs in a district's obligation to their students and the community. These prongs include: districts have the obligation to disseminate information on safety precautions for the virus and should follow CDC guidelines. Equal communication should be provided for English language learners. OCR reminded districts of their obligation to be mindful of students' civil rights and to respond appropriately to allegations of discrimination. With the pandemic came a significant increase in hate and xenophobia against Asian Americans and those of Asian descent. By April 2020, there were over 1,500 reported cases of discrimination against Asians in the United States. OCR strongly stated that the virus and CDC guidance should not be a civil rights concern. Districts were strongly encouraged to address instances of bullying, denial of access to education, and the responsibility to students with disabilities. It was encouraged that if students became ill and were advised by a medical provider to stay home for an extended period, provisions should be made to continue education services, perhaps by providing homebound services or other methods as agreed by an IEP team. OCR advised that if school is closed and servicing the general population of students, then schools must continue to provide FAPE to students with disabilities. OCR very strongly advised that the difficulty to provide special education to children with disabilities and meet the requirements of a FAPE should not be a basis to close schools. Districts must maintain a student's IEP-related services, although those services may not look the same as if in person, but should be provided as accessibly as possible. Additionally, IEP teams may need to determine the amount of regression and possible minutes that need to be made up once school resumes. Having good baseline information and data of the student's progress at the point of school closure can help a team determine where the child should have progressed if school had remained open. The IEP team should determine the amount of minutes a child will need to bring them to that point in a short period of time. OCR advised that IEP timelines may not be appropriate and should be agreed upon as a team to go outside of those timelines. Anytime a team agrees to go beyond the required 30, 60, 30 timelines in the special education process, it should be documented that it was agreed by both the parent and the LEA. The basis for the extension and all good faith efforts made to complete that process. IEP teams are not required to meet in person, and flexibility should be extended to parents. Required team members are still required to attend, and agreement between the parent and LEA to excuse a team member must still be completed in writing. Meetings may be conducted by virtual methods or conference calls. Please keep in mind the procedural requirements of notice of meeting, excusal of team members, prior written notice, or notice of action still apply when conducting meetings by alternate methods. Districts may not offer blanket IEPs or notice of actions for a change in minutes and services, meaning a district cannot say, because we are providing a virtual model of instruction, we are only giving 30 minutes of speech and language services, or we cannot provide pragmatic language instruction virtually, or this related service will be provided as a group rather than one-on-one. Remember, special education programming is a team decision, not a district decision. FAPE is still required to meet the unique needs and circumstances of the child in order for the child to access and receive meaningful benefits of the curriculum. Virtual learning would be a very unique circumstance to meet, and the needs of a child to be able to access the instruction as they're typically developing peers must be addressed. Evaluations may be delayed due to an inability to meet the direct requirements of testing protocols. It is difficult to know whether or not a child has regressed, and the test results that were compiled prior to the closures in spring may no longer be valid. Any evaluation, whether started and postponed or delayed due to school closures, should be reconvened as quickly as possible this fall, especially for students who have not yet been qualified and are in need of special education services. We should not assume that testing protocols cannot be followed, and if not, the IEP team or multidisciplinary team needs to determine where the testing may be completed in order to gain the most accurate results. All best efforts of best practice should be made. The district's obligation to IDEA's child find requirements have not been renounced. On March 31st, 2020, the Department of Education waived districts the requirements for state standardized testing requirements under the Every Student Succeeds Act. This is our nation's Accountability Act, and it is the first time since the Department of Education required testing of student achievement in 1994 that this requirement has been waived. In our state, we know this as MAP testing or EOC, end of course testing for our high school students. There was a strong push from Congress and the districts to waive the strict requirements to the provision of FAPE for our students with disabilities. Betsy DeVos, our Secretary of Education, firmly held that learning for all children must continue. She stated, while the department has provided extensive flexibility to help schools transition, there is no reason for Congress to waive any provision designed to keep students learning. With ingenuity, innovation, and grit, I know this nation's educators and schools can continue to faithfully educate every one of its students. The Secretary has not wavered in the FAPE requirements under our nation's laws. Additionally, under ESSA, the district's concerns with the attendance requirements when considering their reopening plans for the 2021 school year, the Department of Education has not waived the attendance requirements to meet state funding. DESE has changed the calculation method of attendance to demonstrate attendance for all methods of instruction delivery. As you may be aware, many of our districts have offered parents a choice of how they wish their children to be educated this coming school year, in person, virtual, or a hybrid model. Beginning the school year for 2021, an LEA will not be required to make up upwards of 36 instructional school hours that were lost due to exceptional or emergency situations per revised Missouri statute. This is the same statute that addresses school hours missed due to snow and inclement weather. Each district must have submitted an alternate method of instruction plan to DESE for approval in order to continue to receive funding under our accountability law, the Every Student Succeeds Act. In response to guidance by OCR, DESE created changes to the model IEP form and created a new Form G for distance learning plans. OCR advised that an IEP team should consider a distance learning plan in the child's IEP in the event that there was a selective closure due to COVID-19 outbreak. Contingency provisions should be made if special education and related services need to be provided in an alternate location or other method of instruction. Teams should make such provisions prior to a school closure so that service providers and parents have an opportunity to reach an agreement to what would trigger the use of such plan and what would be provided. The changes to the IEP forms include a new section to the present level of academic achievement and functional performance to address alternate methods of instruction in the event of school closure. This area should describe what challenges and needs the child has in order to participate in AMI and how that method of instruction will be provided. Remember that our present level is our baseline of what we know about the child so that we can properly move forward with the development of the IEP to address all of the child's unique needs. The special considerations page now has an additional checkbox to indicate whether the LEA does or does not have a DESE-approved AMI plan and whether one needs to be developed for the child. Districts were required to submit their AMI development plans to DESE by June 1st for approval. If either box is checked to indicate that the district needs to develop an AMI plan, then the new Form G developed by DESE must be completed. Given our state's current situation and the reopening plans offering parents the choice of in-person or virtual learning modalities, and the model of a tiered step down of reopening from in-person to hybrid to full virtual learning, every IEP must be amended in an expedited manner. I would suggest that parents reach out to their school principal or case manager to schedule an IEP meeting. This process is going to be a huge undertaking on our districts. What we do not want to happen is for districts to offer parents blanket IEPs and notice of actions without the parent's right to participation. Parents recognize the difficulties their child had this past spring and the struggles parents have with virtual participation while supporting their child. Parents should have their full right to participate in the development of this form. Form G is an addendum to the IEP. It is essentially an IEP within an IEP. This is a plan for how instruction and related services will be provided. It should address how those services will be provided, who will be responsible for providing the instruction, and the modality for how that instruction or service will be provided, and accommodations or modifications the child needs, as well as the frequency required. The plan should include any supplementary aids and services the child needs to include and are not limited to a paraprofessional or adult aid, a behavior specialist, assistive technology, technology devices and Wi-Fi, etc. Whether or not the district is providing the technology to the general population of students, IEP teams are required to determine whether a child with an IEP needs technology to meet their unique needs and circumstances. Remember that the child must be able to access and receive meaningful benefit of the instruction. It should never be appropriate for a district to say, we don't provide that service virtually. Or if the child needs these things, then they have to participate in the in-person model of learning or be unenrolled from special education. For children who have pre-existing health conditions, are medically fragile, or have sensory processing disorders that may risk the safety of the student or inhibit the ability to wear a mask, the parent should seek a letter from their medical provider to document the need for virtual learning. Parents are not required to provide the provision of FAPE, and the onus to educate a child should not be placed on the parent. Other modalities of instruction may include packets, phone calls, hotspots, and in-person or distant teacher visits via FaceTime or Skype. Related services should be provided in a way that best meets the circumstances of the child. Virtual methods could include teletherapy or telepractice. LEAs may also train parents via telephone, videos, or instructional packets to perform specific tasks or exercises. Parent training is an additional supplementary aid and service that can be included in the IEP. How data for goal progress monitoring will be collected and who will collect the data must also be included in the student's AMI plan. IEP teams also need to consider what IEP service minutes were not provided this past spring and what minutes need to be made up. Districts should be intentional when addressing educational impact that may have been caused due to school closure. It can be assumed that students regressed in skills, and data should be collected to determine where the child is currently meeting their IEP goals, where they were prior to school closure, and where they should have been had school not closed in order to close the gap in learning. Teams should determine if additional support services need to be provided to bridge the gaps between where the student is and where the student was expected to be at the beginning of the new school year. I have included a list of resources that were used in the development of this training to include the link to Form G for your review. Thank you for participating, and we will happily continue to answer your questions.
Yeah, so if anybody has specific questions right now, we would be happy to address those. If you do not have any questions, you can access this presentation on our moleapnetwork.com website. There's also additional training that we are offering through LEAP that you can access on our website as well. We know it's a really complicated time, and it's very hard to navigate. I think what we really need to remember is that regardless of how services and instruction are being provided, whether it be done in person, virtually, or some type of hybrid, we still have to meet the unique needs of every child. And so that can be a combination of things. We also have to address any regression that occurred. It's going to be a daunting task for school districts to update every IEP. So that's required that they have to update every IEP to address distance learning. That is going to be a challenging task. So we want to make sure that we're doing our best to work with them, but at the same time, making sure that we are not ignoring the individual needs of each child. They should be meaningful IEP meetings, not just, as Kaycee referred to, the standard, this is what we're going to do for everybody. We really need to think through, what does this child need? What do we need to provide in the home? What do we need to provide in other ways to make sure that this child continues to receive a free, appropriate public education? If there are no questions, then we'll go ahead and end our Facebook Live event. We really appreciate everybody attending. Thank you very much.